You know what the Hockey Hall of Fame inductees for 2023 announced? We're going to be doing a regular podcast series starting tonight on some obscure members of the Hall of Fame that should be remembered but are not. Now, this guy was part of the Montreal Canadiens back in the day, but was most well known for being part of the Detroit Red Wings mini dynasty of the late 1930s. He had a great nickname, Goal a Game. No, not the gag line, not Gilbert, Hatfield, and Rattel, but the great Marty Berry. This Canadian pro ice hockey forward played in the NHL for New York Americans, Boston Bruins, the Red Wings, and the Habs in the NHL between 27 and 40. He was frequently among the league's leading scorers, and after winning his first Stanley Cup, the Red Wings in 36, he scored a title-winning goal in 37. He won the Lady Byng in 37 as NHL's most gentlemanly player and was named to the first All-Star team. Following his playing career, he coached junior and senior teams in Halifax for numerous years and was inducted to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1965. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1969 at the young age of 63. Born in Quebec City, but he grew up in Montreal and played amateur hockey for various teams in the city when he earned the nickname Goal a Game Barry. Both the Habs and Maroons passed him over, so Barry signed with New York Americans in 27. He made his NHL debut in 28 and scored 1 goal in 9 games for New York. He spent the majority of the season in the Can-Am Hockey League with the Philadelphia Arrows. He remained in the Can-Am League for the 29th season, where he was a member of the New Haven Eagles. He led the league in both goals, 19 and points, and 29. He battled Art Chapman for the scoring title, which he eventually won on the final day of the season. The Bruins eventually claimed Barry for the Americans in the Interleague draft in May 29, and from that point he remained in the NHL. He missed only 2 games total in the following 10 seasons, rivaling Doug Jarvis for durability. Barry recorded 18 goals and 33 assists, 33 points and 30 for a Bruins team that set an NHL record with 38 wins in 44 games. Barry scored 3 playoff goals to help Boston eliminate the Maroons in the semifinal, but Boston was upset by the Habs in the Stanley Cup final. From there, he rapidly developed into one of Boston's top offensive threats. He averaged 23 goals per season in his 6 years with the squad. The Bruins named him team captain in 33, and he led the squad in goals for 3 consecutive seasons between 31 and 34, with 21, 24, and 27 respectively, and was the team's leading point scorer 3 times between 32 and 35. He was also among the league scoring leaders and finished 7th in NHL with 37 points in 33, 4th with 39 and 34, and 8th with 40 and 35. Now, a disputed goal by Barry was a flashpoint in the first ever NHL forfeit on March 14, 33. Barry scored a controversial overtime goal for Boston in a home game versus the Blackhawks. At that time, NHL overtime for regular season play consisted of a full 10-minute period. An enraged Chicago coach, future Hall of Famer Tommy Gorman, punched referee Bill Stewart. Stewart summoned the police to remove Gorman from the visitors' bench, and the Blackhawk players refused to continue the game without their coach. The game was forfeited to Boston shortly thereafter. Now, Barry was involved in a major trade prior to the 36th season, one of the biggest ever. The Bruins sent Barry and Art Giroux to the Red Wings on June 30th, 35, in exchange for Cooney Wheeland and Walt Buswell. With Detroit, Barry centered a high-scoring line with Herbie Lewis and Larry Aurier as his wings. Barry finished 3rd in the NHL with 21 goals and 2nd with 40 points. In the opening game of the playoffs, he played in the longest game in NHL history, a 1-0 victory over the Montreal Maroons that required 6 overtime periods to determine a winner. Now, according to Barry, the rink seemed like it was miles long after 10 minutes to 2 o'clock in the morning. Players of both teams were praying for somebody to score before we all fell from exhaustion. Now, the Red Wings eventually defeated Maroons in the playoff semifinal for taking on the Maple Leafs in the final and defeating them to claim Detroit's first NHL title. Barry scored a goal in the clinching game, a 3-2 Red Wings victory. He was a central figure for Detroit as the Red Wings continued to have success as champions in 37. That year, he finished 3rd in regular season scoring with 44 points. Then led all players with goals and assists, 4 and 7 in the postseason. Now, those 2 consecutive victories pretty well saved the franchise. There was a lot of financial problems after the end of the Depression. Now, in that clinching victory over the Rangers in the 37 final, Barry scored twice, including his 2nd cup clinching goal, and had an assist in a 3-0 victory. He was named the NHL's first All-Star team at center and won the Lady Byng as the league's most gentlemanly player. Now, after a 38th season in which Barrie scored over 9 goals, he returned the NHL leaderboard by finishing fourth with 41 points in 39. The Red Wings spent several months attempting to trade the 34-year-old Barrie to the Canadiens. When Montreal feigned a lack of interest, Detroit eventually granted him an outright release and made him a free agent shortly before the 1940 season began. 2 days after his release, the Canadiens signed Barrie to a contract. His tenure with Montreal was short-lived, however. After scoring only 4 goals and 14 points in 30 games, Montreal released Barrie from his contract. He signed on with the Pittsburgh Hornets of the IAHA, or the International American Hockey League, to complete the year. Barrie played his final season of pro hockey in 41 in a dual role of player-coach for the Minneapolis Millers of the American Hockey Association. Now, Barrie retired with 195 goals and 387 points in 509 NHL games. He was regarded as one of the league's best playmakers during his career and possessed a good scoring touch and close around the net. Barrie was a very dedicated player, and his induction to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1965 was celebrated from throughout Michigan and Canada because of his dedication in all facets of his game. Now, when Barrie coached the Millers for one more season in 42, he then settled with his wife and 3 surviving children. Unfortunately, one died shortly after childbirth in his adopted hometown of Halifax. Barrie managed a grocery store in nearby Dartmouth. Remaining active in hockey, Barrie coached the St. Mary's Juniors in Halifax for many years throughout the 40s and into the 50s. He also coached the Halifax Crescents of the Maritime Senior League for a time. Barrie's junior team won Maritime Championships and reached the Eastern Final of the 47 Memorial Cup. Hoping to raise the quality of competition for his team, he convinced squads from as far away as Montreal to play in Halifax and exposed his players to pro scouts. Now, in recognition of his contribution, he was an original inductee of the Nova Scotia Sports Hall of Fame when it opened in 1964. Unfortunately, Barrie died of a heart attack at home on August 20th, 1969. Now, in Montreal, the early 1920s, Montreal St. Anthony's, Montreal St. Anne's, and the Montreal Bell Telephone. Played with the Americans and the Philadelphia Arrows in 28, New Haven in 29, Boston 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. Goals 18, 20, 21, 24, 27, and 20. Detroit, the back-to-back victories, 21, 17 goals. 2 more seasons with Detroit. Went over to Montreal in 1940 and wrapped up with the Hornets and the Millers in the minor leagues in 40 and 41. Now, Stanley Cup champion twice, first team All-Star in that magic year of 37, and Lady Byng, most sportsmanlike player in 37, won that. So in his career, 509 goals, 509 games, 195 assists, 387 points, only 230 minutes in the sin bin. In the playoffs, 15 goals, 18 assists for 33 points, with 30 to 34 penalty minutes and 43 contests. Now, the idea about Mr. Barrie, I heard about him when I started covering junior A hockey full-time for the Bugle Observer with Woodstock Slammers. I heard legends of Barrie, and this is one legend I heard. He was at a certain game involving Halifax, his junior side, and there was a heckler in the crowd saying, you know, what do you know about hockey? And he turns around and he said, well, I don't know much. He said, I only won 2 Stanley Cups. And he said, what do you mean 2 Stanley Cups? When was this? And he told the person in the crowd, oh, the late 1930s. He said, yeah, I don't believe that. And I guess he had Stanley Cup rings on his hands, and he held up his 2 Stanley Cup rings, and he says, look at this. And I don't think the heckler continued from there. That's the story I was told. And it could be legend or it could be true. But if you're a Stanley Cup winner, what are your players going to say back to you? You know, you don't know what you're talking about. You got 2 freaking Stanley Cups, and you almost won the scoring title. I don't know how many times. When you call you a goal a game, you got to be good. So that's a legend of the great Marty Barrie. Loved in Halifax, loved throughout Quebec, loved in Detroit, loved by all these NHL compatriots. If you like what you're doing here, we're a Vintage Hall of Fame podcast. Let us know what a like, comment, subscribe, or share. Bye.